Okay, I guess I'll jump in here and go ahead and start the lunchtime learning focus on all birds for the Midwest Poultry Federation. I'm Ken Kolkebeck, University of Illinois, and I'll be your chairperson moderator for three outstanding speakers we have here today. And first up is going to be Ms. Hinda Mitchell. And Hinda has been with us before in the past and has done a great job. She is the president of the Inspire Group. This is a national strategic communications firm based out of Columbus, Ohio. And she's going to talk today about why basically food and farm businesses should make communicating with their employees and transparency with employees basically a top priority to get things done. And she'll go ahead into her presentation. I think you'll find it very interesting. After a presentation, if you have Q&A questions, we'll address those, and then she can respond to those, and then we'll go on to our second speaker. So Hinda, you're on.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. Or yeah, I guess it is now afternoon by 1 minute, depending on where you are. Excited to be with you today and talk a little bit more about internal communications and why it's so important for food producers and others in our poultry community to really engage their teams and to make sure that we're making employees our number one priority audience as we are navigating through this strange time of life. And a lot of these slides that I'm going to share with you today were put together based on sort of two things that I have seen. Thing one is mistakes I've seen happening within companies across the U.S. during this time of COVID-19. And then the other sort of piece that informed this presentation is the work that we've been doing with a number of different clients and organizations over the past 5 or 6 months to help them navigate through this time and to help them build strong internal communications programs. So it sort of takes a hit from both sides, what's been done well and what could have been done better. So, you know, this is why we're here today, because employee engagement, talking to your teams is really more important than it's ever been before. And I want to just give you, in this short time together, a few sort of tips and tricks that'll make you smarter about how you communicate and help you avoid some landmines that we see ahead. And really just to help you as employers, as organizations in the poultry community to be better positioned for the future. And the reality is that we're going to talk a lot about why, you know, our farms and our very livelihoods are at risk during this time. And certainly, as you watch sort of some of these situations evolve with different food companies across the U.S., you know, you see what's happening in real time. And there's been really COVID-19 has had significant impact on employee and employer relationships. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of how those negative employee experiences really will have a negative reputational impact on your brand and on your business. We'll touch a little bit about social media and traditional media. A lot of what you're seeing out there right now has to do with employees who are whistleblowing, and they're not just whistleblowing to government agencies, they're also whistleblowing to the media, and they're putting things out on social media. If you're not doing a good job of engaging your team, they may force your hand. We'll talk briefly about some tools and resources for connecting with your employees, and we'll talk about why you really need to lean in on your culture and values as you are planning your employee communications strategy. I want to start with just a baseline observation, which is that we as employers have to remember that our employees are still struggling. They're trying to figure out a lot of the same things we as business owners, as leaders of organizations are also trying to figure out. We have healthcare considerations. We have financial considerations. Lots of folks are still trying to figure out childcare, especially in those markets where the kids aren't going back to school full time or may not even be going back into those classrooms at all in a physical way. They're figuring out education. They are really afraid of going back to work. They're worried about being exposed. They're worried about what their exposure may do to other people in their families. And so that's a really important baseline, and that's going to frame a lot of what I talked to you about in terms of advice today. We know that times have been tough for our teams and also for our industry overall. We've been hit hard. We've seen issues over the past few months dealing with outbreaks in our companies. We're having issues with fulfillment and replenishment within our own companies. Our distributors may not be cooperating, and they also are facing their own challenges. We've seen prices go up and down as food supplies ebb and flow on the commodity market. We're seeing labor shortages, not only from people who are just not a general lack of available workers, but also we're seeing people who are afraid to come to work, or people who can't come to work because they haven't addressed those healthcare concerns, those childcare concerns, things like that. And certainly we've just had an unfavorable climate for doing business right now. People are uncomfortable. Everything is harder. That's the one thing I keep saying to people is everything's just harder than it used to be. And all of this is happening at a time when, as food producers, how we contribute to the food supply is critically important. And so we have a big, giant role to play, but we also are really facing a lot of challenges that we've really never been through before. Here's just an example of some headlines that I pulled from, and I could have pulled a dozen more or 10 dozen more really, but it's really easy to get it wrong. I mean, you're seeing these headlines, peak season for farm workers, but they're really frustrated with COVID safety guidelines. We've seen a lot of meat packing plant stories. We have a big series of meat packing stories happening in Ohio right now. We're talking about violations. These people who have been essential workers, who've been coming to work since the COVID-19 pandemic began, the essential workers, they're feeling a little beat on, and they're feeling like they've just been really struggling, and they've been coming to work every day. And we're seeing a lot of these stories come out as well, which is that employees are at risk. And we know that we've done a lot of things to try and keep employees safe, but no good deed goes unpunished, right? And we're still seeing a lot of folks feeling like there's risk. But really, as employers and as we communicate, it all comes down to this. These negative stories are coming from workplace environments where the employer is not listening to their concerns of their employees or their customers. They're not complying with government guidance and best practices for opening and operating their businesses. They're failing to adequately communicate with their teams and to over-communicate when, again, those stress levels, those emotions, that struggle is so great. And we have some businesses out there that simply have really misplaced their priorities. They've let things get in the way of how they care for their teams right now. And that's then leading to all of those negative headlines I just shared. So why? Why do we do this? Why do we need to expand our communication with employees? Well, you know what? We were essential back in March, and all employees are just as essential today because we've got to keep our businesses running. We've got to keep our organizations operational. This is more important than ever because when you have a strong employee communications program, good for morale, it's good for your culture, it leads to stability within your organization, and it also contributes ultimately to the growth and success of your business. Without a strong team of people, without that backbone of your business, you're not going to have that kind of success you need. The bottom line really is that communicating often and communicating openly will build trust, transparency, and alignment between you as an employer and your team of employees. So a few sort of guidelines on that internal communications checklist. Now is not the time for these long, drawn out memos. If I was in a real audience with you all, I would ask you all to raise your hand if you're tired of getting emails from every brand that you've ever engaged with electronically over the course of your life. Yes. We're getting these long messages every day that start out with cliche language, and they're just exhausting. So an important guide is to communicate in digestible quantities. Another important guide is to communicate with your employees where they are. And that may mean you communicate differently. And we'll talk about some tools to help you do that. If you didn't have a great internal communications program before, that's okay. This is your opportunity to do better and to be better than you were before. One way to do that is to have meaningful feedback circles. Talking to your employees ought to be about pushing and pulling. You want to push information out to them, but you also want to pull information back from them. And so those feedback circles, getting their pulse, getting their sentiment is really important. I talked at the beginning about all of the struggles that we as people, we as Americans are facing right now. And so it's important for you as an employer to think about your communications in the context of caring for the whole employee. It isn't just, here's how you do your job, here's how you produce this food, here's how the line works. You really got to think about that whole employee and what are all of the things that they're facing and how do you navigate through that with them. Going along with feedback circles is really a commitment to listening. It's hard sometimes as an employer to not just believe you're doing everything you can. And as employers, I'm one too, we're all frustrated. We're all thinking about, gosh, what more can they want from us, right? But you've got to commit to listening to those team members as well. You've got internal networks in place and you've got leadership on your team. Get those folks in place to amplify your message. Don't just assume that you as the owner or you as the manager have to be the only one communicating. Build up other people in your organization to help you carry these communications messages forward. Lastly, just a point to make, which is that you're going to make mistakes. And as you do, it's okay. Flag those missteps, acknowledge you did something that maybe didn't quite hit the way you intended it to, and take a course correction. That's okay. People appreciate that. That's another great way to build trust, is to acknowledge when you've done something wrong. So what are some of those tools you can use? Well, these are some obvious ones. You can talk to them face to face, right? That's an easy one. And you should encourage your supervisors, those folks who are on your plant floor, who are in your barns, to talk to people, get in their faces, talk to them about what's going on. For those employees who are on your email server, you certainly can use email as an important tool for them. Maybe you have an employee newsletter. Maybe that goes out electronically. Maybe it's distributed in your break room. But however you can do it, use those existing communications tools. I talked about meeting those employees where they are and the value of creating other people within your organization to carry your message. And that really leads us to some of those not so obvious ways to get your message across. If you've got something that's really important, put some talking points in the hands of your supervisors so that, again, they can help amplify it. Doesn't mean you don't send the email, doesn't mean you don't post the break room sign, but give your supervisors the power, empower them to be able to carry that message forward for you even more. For those employees who don't have email or as a way to sort of get mass information out to folks quickly, consider putting in a texting program for your business if you don't have it already. If you may use it for emergencies, it's also a great way to get information to people quickly. You can text them a link, you can house information on your website that they can then click on that link on their phone, get to them where they are. If you want to communicate well, you've got to get it in their hands first and foremost. Consider creating private employee Facebook. So we represent a number of companies who have really great public-facing Facebook pages, and their employees engage on those public pages. So what we advise them to do was, why don't we create a private group too? We know they're on Facebook. Let's bring them into this private space where we can communicate directly with them. Consider creating an intranet site for your business. If you can't do a full-on intranet site, maybe post some website on a hidden page on your website, and then again share those links through Facebook, through texting, through email, so that they know they can go to one dedicated place on your website for updated information about what's going on with this pandemic and your business. Another big thing that's important as a leader right now, as you think about internal communications, is you've got to be able to see around the corner, right? This isn't just about what lies right in front of us, but what's around the corner that we can't yet see, and how do we manage expectations for our employees as we're doing that? You're going to have to be ready to continue reassuring your employees, continue over-communicating, to continue to talk about health and safety practices and to change those practices as we get new information. I'm sure you're all as overwhelmed as I am about the volume of information coming in. Do this, don't do this, do that, don't do that. And so you're going to have to keep continuing to pivot as you need based on the new things you've learned about the right kinds of practices. Because if you don't do that, if you don't continue to communicate, they're not going to feel safe, they're not going to feel confident. And that creates a situation where if they're not getting the answers they need from you, they may go elsewhere to get those answers, or they may go to the media or on the social media to vent their frustration. As you think about what lies around the corner, you're going to have to prepare for continued volatility. I think all of us hoped that we would be on the back end of this pandemic by the time late summer and early fall rolled around, and it's now becoming apparent that that's probably not going to happen. There's going to be continued volatility in our poultry markets. There's going to be continued volatility within our businesses and our teams, and that's part of our job as leaders in these businesses to be prepared for that continued volatility. This just some data points that I thought would be helpful as we think about sort of people coming back into our workplaces and in essential workers where they never left our workplaces. And so SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Managers, did a return to work survey, and they asked 1,000 people, how are you feeling about going back to work? And what they found is that half of them still remained afraid to go back to work. And 1 in 4 really weren't confident in their employer and that they created a safe and healthy workplace to return to. That's an important number. If you've got 1 in 4 people in your business who are nervous about whether it's a safe place to be, you need to get in and course correct on that pretty quickly. And while half of people said they'd like to go back to work and see their colleagues, 1 in 5 people said they couldn't think of a single reason they wanted to return to the workplace. So again, we've got to continue to have those conversations, continue to make people feel reassured, to make people feel safe so that they're not afraid to be at work. Because being afraid to be at work really will be detrimental to your culture and to your long-term vitality. So as you think about how to do this, and we've been having so many conversations over the past few weeks about people who've had to really look at their core values and say, do they still reflect who we are as a business? And is the way that you're acting aligned with your stated values? A lot of people have in their company values, our team is our #1 asset, our employees are the foundation of our business, caring for our team is our priority. But are you showing them that then in the actions that you take on behalf of your team? These are questions you have to answer, and a great strategy for internal communications is to lean into those values. If you're having some culture and morale issues, reminding your team of your values and then acting on those values can help. Teddy Roosevelt said they won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And this is an important point as you think about how you communicate, because all of the data, all of the knowledge, all of the processes and science that you might want to communicate won't be as effective as you just acknowledging to them, we care about you, you matter to us, and we want to make this a safe and healthy workplace. If you disconnect, if you come out of alignment between how you act and what your stated values are, that can really be devastating to your business. Devastating is a big word, but it's a true word in this, because again, if you create that inconsistency, people aren't really going to know what that you stand for at best, and at worst, they're going to not trust you. They're not going to trust you because they're going to look at your words, and they're going to look at your deeds, and they're going to realize they're not the same. So take a look at these numbers here. If you don't believe me when I say you should lean into your values, take a look at some of these proof points for your business. Customer satisfaction is 9 times more likely in organizations where employees are motivated by shared values, purpose, and mission. 9 times, that's a big number. Well over half of consumers prefer to purchase from companies that stand for a purpose that reflects their own values. So connecting with those consumer values is really, really important. And well over half of employees and job seekers say company culture is more important than salary when it comes to job satisfaction. So if you want a satisfied, productive workforce, connecting to that good company culture and having a purpose and having a vision for your organization is really important, both to your internal teams as well as to your external customers. So how do you put those values into action? Well, the easiest thing you can do is to over-communicate. That's what we're here to talk about today. We're talking about communicating with your employees. When you do so, you've got to be authentic and you've got to be transparent. Tell them what's going on in your business. Don't make them wonder if you're stable. Don't make them wonder if you're going to make this pandemic. Have real, meaningful conversations with them. Where you can, when you're able to do so, provide them extra support. Maybe you want to offer mental health counseling. Maybe you want to figure out how to support them in their childcare and K-12 school needs. Think about those ways that you can take those values sharing with the team and put those into action. Having clarity is critical. Don't speak in gray areas. Try really hard to speak as clearly and with as much absolute information as you can. Just because you talked about health and safety back in March when you kept your plant open for those essential workers doesn't mean you're done. This is not a box you checked. Health and safety is a continued message for every food production business right now. Continue to tell them steps you're taking, what you're doing to assure a safe place. As you're thinking about your values, it's not always going to feel easy. It may be the right thing to do, but often doing the right thing is not doing what's easy. And so you're really going to have to sort of buckle up on this one, folks, and do what's right. As you're looking around that corner, you need to help your employees get there too. Help them see the future. You may not have a crystal ball for every situation or for what the long-term opportunities are for your business, but to the extent that you can, help them get to the other side of this. Help them see where you're headed as a company and how you're going to successfully bring them there in a safe and healthy way. So as I said earlier, I think we might have all thought that we'd be coming out of this COVID thing by now, or at least on the path to recovery, but we know now that this is really far from over. So continuing to have a recovery plan, continuing to help your team see what's next is really important. But the reality is we don't know what a month from now looks like. We don't really know what a week from now looks like. So you've got to sort of have plans for your business for the short term and prepare for the long term. And then you've got to leverage those communications platforms to tell your employees what your plan is. Here's what we know in the short term. We don't know what's going to happen later, but we're doing our best to plan for every possible scenario. Again, avoid long pieces of information. Give them short, frequent bursts of information. I have a client who calls this snackable. Think about snackable information. How can you give them small pieces of information? Highlight the creative approaches. Look at what we're doing. Look at what we're doing, right? Look at all the things that we're doing. Get their feedback. Again, create those feedback circles and do a lot of listening so that you can continue to focus on doing what's best. So as you think a little bit about operating in COVID, it's really important for you to prepare for all of the things that could happen. And all of this comes back to a really strong internal communication program. Got to operate as swiftly, successfully, and carefully as possible. You know that gets revenue flowing, and that's the best way to course correct through these challenges and to keep your employees confident. Keep them busy, keep them safe. Make sure that they do feel confident in the health and safety processes that you put in place. Get that feedback. Continue to reassure them. This is a time we got to tell them again, and then we got to remind them. They've got to continue to hear from us that we're putting steps in place. We have steps in place. We're learning from public health guidance to make sure they feel safe while they're at work. What's really also important is you've got to be ready as an employer for what the next crises might look like. These employee expectations are big, and you've got to be ready for how those expectations may move into a crisis. Okay, so tell me, Hinda, what might happen? We could have a positive COVID-19 in an employee. Many of you have probably already experienced that. We may have employees as whistleblowers who complain to the local health department or the state health department about practices in your business. You may have a social media crisis. You may have to take further employee actions if your business isn't recovering to the extent you thought it would. You may have to furlough employees again. You may have to consider a permanent layoff. You may have to ask everybody to take a pay cut. We don't know what's going to come ahead, but all of these are things that you as a business owner, you as a leader, ought to be prepared to communicate about within your own organization. We also have a lot of other crisis concerns to think about. What's going to happen within your business if you have confrontations and escalations of situations? One employee may hear that another employee came to work sick, and that could lead to a confrontation. You may hear that somebody was one of those people who was out in one of those bars that you've seen on social media videos where everybody's exposing everybody, and then they come to work, and that can lead to an escalated situation of conflict within your business. Are you ready to talk about that? Are you ready to communicate through that? You may have employee protests. We've seen that with some businesses where a group of employees get together and they protest what they deem are not appropriate health and safety practices. They may not be, or they may be, but that won't stop them from protesting. Likewise, you may actually get a health department report, inspection. You may get a violation. That may make it into the news media. You're going to have to deal with that. You may have a social media post or an employee video. An employee may take a video of operations within your company that they don't think meet those health and safety standards or aren't in compliance with public health guidance. Then you've got to deal with that. All of these are things that you need to be prepared for as a leader in how you communicate. What's more important to think about is all of these can also lead to inquiries from the media, and then you've got the media coming and knocking on your door. Oh, you've had a situation escalate. We heard rumors that things went haywire in your business today. We want to cover that. They may get information from the health department. They're doing a lot of monitoring right now of what public reports are out there. We've seen that in Ohio. They're doing lists of companies that have had health department violations, and they're publishing those. That employee that takes that social media video, they might send it directly to the media, or the media might find it on Facebook. Employees may complain directly to the media. A lot of those headlines I shared with you earlier came from that. That's what they do, right? That's how they communicate. They go to the media thinking that the media will then help them act. So as you think about your internal team and how you're going to navigate through these conflicts, I mean, just a sidebar of sharing of how you deal with conflict or confrontation within your business. And I encourage you to share this information with your managers within your organization, because if not, these situations can quickly get out of hand. You need to work quickly to try and diffuse the situation. Again, this is about communication. Listen to their concerns, engage with them. Whether their concern is valid or not, you need to acknowledge it, because just because you may not agree with it doesn't mean it's not a concern to them. To the extent that you're able, without physically doing so, encourage them to move away to a quiet area away from your other employees. Continue to be calm, continue to work to de-escalate the situation. My social worker daughter says to me, the number one thing you shouldn't do to somebody who's all in a tizzy is, she said, don't tell them to calm down, because that'll just make them madder. So don't tell them to calm down. Listen with empathy. Understand the issues they're concerned about. They may say crazy things, but behind all of that, there's probably an issue that is important to them, whether it's I'm fearful for my health and safety, or I can't navigate the childcare situation I have at home. Try and listen to the issue at hand, not perhaps to the strong, nasty words they may be choosing as part of this conflict. Don't dismiss their concerns out of hand. Use affirming words. I understand. I hear you. I agree with you. Don't insert your personal opinions. And if they've got a legitimate beef, correct the situation. The best thing you can do, again, is align your actions back to those values. And if there's something happening in your company that's inconsistent with their values, then you want to correct that situation as quickly as possible. So what do you do if the media actually shows up unannounced in this crisis? Well, you need to be polite and courteous. You need to look at what they're looking at. Think about the background. Look at the visuals around them and what are they seeing. To the extent that you can, much like you would in a conflict situation, try to move the media into a quiet location as you can. If you're talking with them, don't speculate. Don't talk about your employee situations. Don't repeat negative language. I heard you were out of compliance. Don't return back by saying, we are not out of compliance, because that's exactly what they're going to put on the news. So talk about our commitment to compliance. Don't repeat that negative. Talk about the positives of what you're doing to remain in compliance. Be prepared to hold your ground. They're going to ask and ask and ask, and you're going to have to continue to sort of hold your ground with the media as you're engaging them. But it's important to remember that the media is another internal communications tool, because how the media reports on your company, your employees, their family, their friends are also going to see that. And so it's really important for you to collaborate and try and be responsive to those media requests. Here's another question, though. Do your employees know what to do if they're approached by a reporter? And important to note, it may not happen at the business. I can tell you from direct experience, some of our clients, they will follow your employees at the end of a shift. They may even go to their home. They'll wait by your back door to find somebody coming out to take a smoke break, and they'll interview them there. These things do happen. Do your employees know what to do if they're approached by a reporter? Do they know what to do if there's a crisis, or are they going to pull out their phone and start filming the fight that's happening on your plant floor? What are they going to do? Do they know what your company's social media policies are? If you don't have media policies and social media policies for your employees, I encourage you to get them. We can help with that. But if you don't have one, you really ought to have one in place. And you ought to know how to do it in a way that doesn't get you crossways with what's legally allowed as well. Here's some language you can hang on to and can share with your employees if they're approached by a member of the media. It's a pretty easy answer. I'm sorry, I'm not an authorized spokesperson for insert the name of the business. I can get you in touch with somebody who is. May I have your name, number, and email? Why does this matter? This matters because employees often will believe that if they talk to a reporter, if a reporter waits outside their plant, maybe your plant's been one of those that's had a number of positive cases. They wait outside your business, they approach your employee. Your employee may talk to that reporter with the best of intentions. They will believe they can help you by talking to the media, and you can imagine how that ends up a lot of the time. Not so great. So sharing this language with all of your employees, building this language into your media policy, your social media policies, is very, very important. Oops, I clicked wrong. There are a lot of great resources to help those in the food industry respond in COVID and to be good employers and to build strong communications. Lots of free resources available online. One of the ones I really like is Kroger. The Kroger company has done a nice blueprint for business based on their experiences as an essential employer, and I think it's a great resource to go online and find. Within your industry, I know that a lot of the state and national poultry trade groups have created specific guidance and resources. I encourage you, whether it's NTF, United Egg, whoever it might be, National Chicken Council, those folks have a lot of great online resources too. And some of them even have templates you can use and just directly copy and paste and fill in for your own business. Folks like me, folks in HR, folks in legal, those are great experts to put on your team to make sure you have the right resources to help you communicate through this. Ultimately, this is where we are, folks. Different is the new normal, and this pandemic is having a real impact on your employees, and you can't just dismiss their fear out of hand. The best way to help them through this is to be a good communicator, be a good employer, make talking to your employees a priority now more than ever. Doing the right thing also matters, because if you don't do the right thing, your employees may turn on you, they may go public, they may create more havoc, and then you're dealing with those crisis situations. What we're doing right now doesn't look like the way we did business before, and our communications can't look like they did before either. Our guidance has to be about being smart, effective, transparent communicators with our team at all times. And that wraps it for me. There's my contact information. I would love to hear from all of you if we can be helpful to you in figuring out these policies, in shaping some of those communications. Certainly would be glad to do it. And connect with me. My information's here. I think you can probably find me. I'm one of the only Hindas in this space. And I'll be glad to do any questions. And Ken, I think I'm to turn it back over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Hinda, and great presentation, much needed information, regardless of the situation we find us in, but every day in normal times, whether we'll ever get back to that or not. So let me check to see whether we have any questions that have popped up here. And I do not see any questions at the moment. So maybe if someone does has a question, don't want to post it right now, that they can post it basically at the end of the three speakers, and we'll do it that way. So thanks, Hinda. We'll move on. Great presentation. We'll move on to our second speaker. Second speaker is Maro Ibarburu, and he's with the Egg Industry Center. He sends out valuable information regarding egg industry statistics. And of course, I think when we were planning the program, Dr. Karch and I decided he would be a great speaker to talk about our ups and downs of egg supply, ups and downs of product moving in the egg industry in relation to COVID-19. So with that, I think he's going to share with us information in regards to what did happen, what's happening now in regards to egg supply. And of course, this relates to both the breakers out there in the industry and the shell egg supply, the carton supply, and everything that happened with the onset of COVID-19 back in mid-March. So, Maro, I think we will turn it over to you if you can access and go through your presentation.
Okay. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you're looking good. Looking good. So,
okay.
Sport coat on. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm going to talk about the egg markets, and then Tom Elam is going to talk about the turkey markets. Sorry. So, in the effort to reduce the effect of the COVID in the U.S., the mass gatherings were canceled, school went to online teaching, and many people were asked to work from home. So with that, the hotel activities went to almost nothing. Restaurants around the country were either forced to close or change to takeout delivery only. And some of the loss in food service sales, of course, was compensated by an increase in the retail store sales, explained by many consumers, eating more at home since they were not going to work, And on top of that, we have the panic buying at the beginning of the pandemic. So this graphic that basically shows the retail sales by sector, In blue is the food service sales, and in red is the grocery sales. And you can see, compared with the last 10 years, how dramatic the shift on the demand was, for one and the other, With the food service sales falling 35 billion or 54% from $65 billion sales in February to only $30 billion sales in April. And then it came back a little, and in June, still the sales on June were $18 billion below February, so 27% lower. On the other hand, the grocery sales increased by 16 billion, or 29%, from 57 billion in February to 74 billion in March, so in 1 month. And then it came down some, and June was still 6 billion above February. So the sum of the two, in June, they were still $12 billion below February. So this created two very different situations, one for the shell egg market and one for the liquid egg market. So I'm going to start with the shell egg market. And you can see that the prices were increasing like normally happened before Easter. And then, people moved to their homes, and all this panic buying happened. And the panic buying was on essential items, including eggs and milk, of course. and some retailers were ordering eggs as much as 400% above the normal level. So it were a crazy few weeks there. Then the demand fell to more normal levels. The margin in the last 2 months have been negative, which is fairly typical for this time of the year. This is a trend of the weekly prices, and you can see that we have like 3 peaks in the last 5 years. We have in 2015 we have the peak of prices because of the avian influenza outbreak. Then in early 2018 we have a second peak on prices that was explained by what was called the retailer war, where the retailers were using eggs among other items as loss leaders to attract consumers, customers. And then the third peak was with the COVID. The first one was because of a shortage of eggs, because of so many layers dying of the avian influenza, and the second and the third were explained by a jump in the demand. So if you look at just at the COVID situation, the price almost tripled from March 2nd to March 30th. So it went from $1.05 per dozen to $3.06 per dozen in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, sorry. But then it dropped almost as fast. It went from $3.06 per dozen in April 3rd to $1.05 in April 27th. The last couple of months, June and July, the warehouse price for large white Midwest eggs was 85 cents per dozen, which is better than last year, but still below the June and July average of 97 cents for the last 10 years. At the retail prices, we see a similar trend for the COVID situation, where the retail price increased from $1.46 per dozen in January to $2.02 per dozen in April, so a 38% increase. But then it dropped down again to levels that are below the 10-year average. So they already started at a level that were lower than the 10-year average. And the shell egg inventory dropped very fast at the beginning of the pandemic with all this panic buying, but then it came back to more or less the normal levels, with their fluctuations that they always have. The egg consumption per person was increased in April and May, and then it came back to June. I don't know if should we call it egg consumption per person, because it doesn't take into consideration how many eggs do they have in the refrigerators, but at least it's the egg buying per person, and then they might have some in storage that explain then, how it went down later, Completely different situation is what happened to the food service, because the institutional demand basically disappeared at the beginning of the pandemic. Many of the dine-in restaurants offer curbside pickup, but most people use that option for lunch or for dinner and not for breakfast. Breakfast is basically where most of the eggs are sold for. Many customers enforce the force majeure in their contracts and stop taking delivery of egg products. And that left many egg producers, liquid egg producers, trying to find where to send these eggs. In fact, some of them had to dispose these eggs, and some of them were trying to find if another livestock industry might take them as a feed ingredient, for example. And many of them through unpaid channels. So some of these eggs, in theory, can be moved to the retail channels, but the situation proved that it was a lot harder than we thought. And I'm going to explain a little bit later. I made this figure with information from American Egg Board newsletters, the NPD CRES performance alert, and information that was published in the weekly newsletter from American Egg Board. And you can see here the trend on the food service transactions with respect to the same year, to the same week last year. In April 15, 70% of the quick service restaurant traffic was off-premise. And then by the week of April 22nd, 620,000 out of the 660,000 restaurants in the MPD database were impacted by the restrictions. By the week of March 29, more than 97% of all U.S. egg restaurants were restricted to off-premise sales only. And that week, full-service sales were 79% lower than a year before, and quick service sales were 40% lower than a year before. And then, after a couple of weeks, things start improving, as some of these states start reopening. On the week of, on the week of April 19, the report said that the improvement was aided by on-premise dining restrictions being lifted in several states, including Georgia, Florida, and Texas, which are big states, in terms of dining customers. And then by the week of April 26, restrictions were lifted in about 192,000 units, which represent 29% of all the restaurants. By May 24, approximately 320,000 restaurant units were open in some capacity, and you can see that as they were starting opening, the situation was getting better in terms of traffic. And then on the week of June 14, improvements were likely due to the 74% of the restaurants being in places and geographies where some level of on-premise dining was permitted, allowed. This is a figure I borrowed from an Ibarburu report that they did during the pandemic that basically show of all the eggs, how many go to the different market. The retail market represent about 60%. These are the eggs that were, this market that was better off by people staying at home. And then the export represent 2.8%, and they didn't change much during the pandemic. Then you have a 7% of the eggs that are produced for the food service as a shell egg. These eggs, since these facilities have the capacity to put them in flats, these are easier to move into the shell egg market, into the shell egg retail market, than the ones that are producing liquid, in facilities that are designed to liquid egg. And then for the further processing eggs, you have the real affected one were the one that were further processed for the food service. And the estimate is that there were about 15% of the eggs in the country go to that. Then you have the further processing for food manufacturing, and these eggs, for the most part, they still had a good market, because they were kept manufacturing pasta and ice cream and all these things that eggs go into. So and this is just a figure of what happened with the liquid whole egg price from Ibarburu data, and you can see that the price reached a minimum of 8 cents per pound, which almost half of the historical low of 14 cents per pound reached at the beginning of 2017. So we compare with the price of water, and a gallon of purified water was at that time 80 cents per gallon, which is equivalent to 9.6 cents per pound. So purified water was 20% more expensive than whole egg at that time. So then the market recuperated some, but still a lot lower than the cost of producing these eggs, let alone, processing the eggs and transporting, packaging. So it's still the market for the liquid whole egg is not doing well. This figure just show the export of shell eggs in blue, egg products in red. You can see that they were not really much affected by the COVID situation. They were more or less at the same level they were at the beginning of the year, with natural fluctuations. One of the challenges with the lack of demand is that it came out at the time where we have a very large dried egg inventory. So there wasn't much more capacity to store these dried eggs. So that eliminated the option for the producers to dry the eggs and store them for later. And so that was very unfortunate that we hit at the time with such large inventories. And that, if we were a different situation, maybe the effect would be more attenuated, And the dry whole egg price didn't fluctuate much. I think in part is because the capacity of storing them for much longer periods of time. So there are many things that make it very difficult to move eggs from the liquid egg market to the shell egg market. One main challenge is the equipment that they have in the facilities. The breaking facilities, they don't have equipment to put these eggs into flats to move them, from the breaking facility to a facility that package eggs. They don't have equipment to package the eggs in these facilities neither, And if you look at the speed that these machines go, then modern machines go about 50 eggs per second. So if you think about, okay, let's do it by hand, first, it's going to be very hard to find enough labor. And second, it's going to be very hard to find a place where to accommodate so many people putting eggs by hand, on flats. Therefore, this is a huge challenge, And then there is another barrier that is the FDA salmonella prevention rule, because you have to test and you have to have all this biosecurity plan in place to be able to ship eggs to the shell egg market, And thankfully, the government helped by relaxing these FDA rules, and they created a temporary pathway for the eggs being produced for liquid egg to move into the shell egg market, and this not only helped the producers, because they can move some of these eggs to the shell egg market that was in high demand, but also help the consumers by increasing the supply of packaged eggs at the retailers. There were some reasons why it didn't help all the producers, so in some cases failed the producers. One is that in order to be able to ship these eggs to the shell egg market, the flock had to be 45 weeks of age or younger. So all these flocks that were 45 weeks or older, they didn't qualify to ship eggs to the shell egg market. So that is probably about 2/3 of the flocks anyway. So then I already mentioned the equipment that they have in the facilities is not the kind of equipment that you could use to put the eggs in the cartons, or not even the flats. So there was a lack of equipment there. And then the lack of inventory of cartons. That was another big challenge because, there were not inventories, so producers were scrambling to find more cartons, the ones that have the capacity to package, and the retailers were in generally not willing to accept flats as an alternative packaging. So this drop in the demand of course, was followed by a drop in the production of liquid edible egg, and because some producers decide to cool their layers earlier, than was scheduled. Some of them decided to mold these flocks for some time, waiting for the market to recuperate. And some were able to send some of the shell eggs to the shell egg market, But if you look at the curve, that was the most dramatic decrease in the number of eggs broken for further processing. It dropped 30% from January to April, and April was in fact 30% lower than what was April 2019. So then we recuperate some of this production, but still last 2 weeks ago when I made this figure, it was 14% lower than January and 10% lower than last year. We were asked to estimate what was the loss in value of the eggs in April with respect, to a normal situation. So we compare with the 10-year average inflation-adjusted value of the eggs. And we estimate that it was at least $110 million lost in the value of the eggs just because of the lack of demand. So the value of the liquid eggs. Another question is how much of the flock we lost because of the pandemic. And, the way of approximating it is comparing how many layers we have in July 1st versus how many we were projecting that we were going to have in July 1st, Because we have a natural drop before that, just because the market was doing so bad last year, So at the beginning of the year, we were already dropping on the number of layers. And then when we compare the July 1st number with the projected number, the July 1st number was 11 million lower. So that's my approximation of how many layers did we lose because of the lack of demand. And if you look at the drop from January 1st to July 1st, was 25 million layers. We lost 10 million layers in Iowa, 19 million layers in the Midwest in general from January to June. And 93% of the drop from March to June was in the Midwest, where most of the liquid egg is produced. So the effect on the Midwest egg production was dramatic, and really reflect what happened with the liquid market. So, and then there is another cut that, thankfully, August 11th, so yesterday, the USDA approved to include liquid and frozen eggs into the coronavirus food assistance program. Producers have a deadline to apply, that is September 11th. And all the information on how to apply and the requirements and everything is in the farmers.gov/CFAP/eggs webpage. And the compensation is basically going to estimate as the sum of the first quarter of production multiplied by the CARES Act payment, that is 5 cents per pound for liquid egg and 6 cents per pound for frozen eggs, plus the first quarter production multiplied by the CCC payment, which is 2 pounds, 2 cents per pound for liquid and frozen eggs. So basically the compensation is 7 cents per pound for the liquid egg and 8 cents per pound for the frozen eggs. On top of that, the Iowa government, through the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, offered some help for the producers that have to euthanize and dispose the laying hens between April 1st and July 20. That help is 25 cents per layer that basically cover the cost of, euthanizing and disposing these birds. And the USDA on May 22nd announced a plan to purchase 2 million pounds of frozen eggs to distribute through the different food nutrition assistance programs. So the government have been helping from different angles, which is, a good sign. Final remarks. This is the second largest drop in the flock, only second to the avian influenza outbreak, but for a completely different situation, different reason, The avian influenza outbreak was the lack of supply because of all these birds dying of the disease. This one is the lack of demand for liquid egg because of all these restaurants and hotels and schools closing. And then this situation really creates a shift on the consumer demand for the period, going from a lot of eating out and, liquid egg, this kind of stuff, to the shell egg market to cook at home. And the long-term effect on the demand is really going to be affected by the number of jobs lost. And many economists are projecting an 11 to 22% decrease in the jobs, an 11 to 22% employment rate that are expected to linger to the end of the year. And the USDA is projecting a drop from 293 eggs per person in 2019 to 282 eggs per person in 2020. So, during a time where we were really increasing demand year over year, we have this huge setback. And then, the access to credit is going to be more difficult to either to convert to cage-free or to expand, just because of the lower capacity to make payments. And, it's when economic situation gets worse, consumers tend to move more towards less expensive items and less towards the more expensive specialty products. With that, I don't know if are there any questions. This is my contact information.
Okay, Maro, thanks for your presentation. Let me check here just a minute. I don't see any questions right now, but I think people will probably hang on and maybe ask something at the end of Tom's talk. So great information, and it's an up and down market, of course, and we'll see kind of how things go in the near future and long-term future. So with that, let's move on to our third speaker, is Dr. Tom Elam. And Dr. Elam is a very accomplished poultry economist for over 35 years. He has stayed here at University of Illinois, Economic Research Service at USDA, and he also developed his own company in regards to FarmEcon LLC, and he's been doing that for about the last 16 years or so. And so he's going to give us an outlook, or the turkey outlook, basically, what happened with the COVID problem back in March and continuing. And so, Tom, we'll turn it over to you if you can get connected.
I think I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Yep. Sure. Can you hear you?
Okay. First part. Outlining the topics. Turkey production, the COVID impacts on demand, and parts markets, whole bird markets, and a little bit on the feed cost outlook. USDA back in July issued a forecast. There's another one coming out today for turkey production for 2020. And that outlook called for, I think, a little bit more turkey than we're actually going to produce. Year to date, at the time of that forecast, we were down 108 million pounds from a year earlier, but 79 million of that was in May. They basically took the 108, doubled it, and guessed from their forecast that production would be down about 208 million for the year. But if you look at trend production, it's more likely we'll be down 300, 350, 400 million pounds on the year. And like the egg industry that we just talked about, that's because last year's margins in turkey were really, really poor. And people are cutting back production because of last year's poor margins. So this is a chart of turkey production monthly from USDA, federally inspected turkey. And you can see that the cutbacks actually started in 2018 and have gone back, remained on that trend right up to today. Some of this is is offset by higher weights, but it's largely been a cutback in bird numbers that have done this. And the reason I think this is going to continue is that if we look at eggs and incubators as a leading indicator of what future production is going to be, it has been trending down since 2018 and is continuing to trend down. And if you don't have eggs and incubators, you're not going to have turkey production 4 to 5 months out. If you just project that trend, you get about between 300 and 400 million pounds of production reduction in 2020 versus 2019. The lower line, the blue and red line, is net poult placements. And you can see the COVID impact on that. In April 2020, poult placements were down 11.3% from March and 9.7% from the prior May. Now, we recovered that, some of it, but that was due to the fact that turkeys were backing up because of processing plant issues, and they couldn't be placed. So they got placed a little later, but still, that was a huge reduction. And the prior red bars are prior April, May poult placements. You can see how unusual it was to have that kind of reduction in 2020. Demand impacts. Well, we just saw a couple of really good slides on what happened with food service and eggs. Similar things have happened in with turkey, but as we'll see here in a minute, the impact on actual consumption wasn't as much as you'd think it might have been. This is Hormel's recent sales shift data from their most recent quarterly report. Now, Hormel, of course, is Jennie-O, but they're also a lot more than Jennie-O. This is their February-April fiscal quarter, but the impact was from mid-March to the end of April. So it was only about half of this period was actually influenced by COVID. And you can see the huge shift, food service going from 716 million to 566 million. And retail increasing from 1.255 billion to 1.455 billion. And for total Hormel, sales actually increased a little bit, but can you imagine what it took to make this happen with food service demand collapsing and turning all of those food service products into retail products was how they were able to do that in such a short period of time over basically a 13-week period is just unbelievable. Another factor has been the retail food service shift aside has been that exports have dropped for turkey. And that is primarily coming out of Mexico, which last year accounted for 2/3 of our export volume. And that has been a significant drop. The result of this has been fairly steady domestic turkey use, despite the shift from, and I'm measuring this in pounds, not in dollars, despite the shift from food service to retail. And another factor that is in the background here is that despite these lost export sales, our 12-month moving average of turkey stocks is declining. We have to look at it on a 12-month moving average basis because it's so seasonal around the holidays. So here's the export picture, and you can see that decline out there in the last few months, which are 2020. We never really recovered from 2015. It was a huge blow to turkey exports. Most of the Midwest was banned from exporting any turkey for months and months and months. We did recover somewhat from that. Mexico fully recovered, but other markets did not. Mexico went from half of our turkey exports to 2/3 of our turkey exports between 2015 and 2019. And the total never really came back. And you can see that drop. This is the latest available data. It's actually, let's see, this is June data. It just came out a few days ago. That drop, and it doesn't appear to be recovering. Stocks, on the other hand, have been declining as well. And this is good news. You can see those peak stocks in 2017 and 18. And starting to come down in 2019. Those high stocks were a result of production exceeding consumption, export and domestic. And that was the reason why we had low prices. And we're in the process of correcting that. And in spite of COVID, those stocks appear to be, on a year-on-year basis, still coming down. In fact, the end of year 2019 stocks were almost as low as they were in 2015. That combined with the production trend we're seeing raises some real hope, I think, that by the end of this year, we're going to be in a much better supply-demand balance for total turkey meat than we have been for the last 2 years. This is monthly domestic consumption or use 2012 to 2020. And it's, in spite of COVID, has remained pretty flat. We basically took some turkey out of stocks, took some turkey out of exports, managed to sell it on the domestic market. But what it doesn't measure is what it costs to do that. We are starting to see some publicly traded companies like Smithfield, Tyson, a couple of other companies that have started to talk about what it's costing them to comply with COVID standards in the production lines. And the costs have been really, really astounding. If you'll Google, it just came out this morning, so it's not in the presentation, but if you'll Google Smithfield COVID impact, it'll take you to some articles that detail how many hundreds of millions of dollars it's costing them to keep their plants running. So domestic use is fine, but and it's a good thing it didn't really decline much, but still the cost impact is reducing profitability of producing turkey in spite of, as we'll see, some better prices. So let's talk about the parts market. Food service parts volume was largely converted to retail, but it was a difficult fit. It's hard to take the products that we sell, just like the eggs, and take them over to retail, but it largely did manage to happen. And this shows up in prices, recovery that from the COVID hit in March and April started to show up in May at higher prices, although they're still not profitable. If we start to see restaurants shut down again because of COVID cases increase, and they appear to be declining right now, but we'll see what happens in the future. And the exports that setbacks show up in fine meat prices, that's our biggest single export item. So let's look at these markets. And these are from USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. The skips you see in the data are weeks where there wasn't enough volume for a price to be quoted. So look at the top line. That's bone skinless breast meat. That is largely a food service item. Goes into deli, packaged lunch meats, and so forth. And you can see that starting in March, that price dived and it went down from over $2 a pound at the end of last year down to $1.50. And then we started to reopen the restaurants, and you can see what happened to that top blue line when the restaurants started to reopen. Almost immediately, the prices for boneless, skinless breast meat started to come back. The orange line just below that is beef-strap tenders, and it followed the same pattern. The light blue line below that is thigh meat, fresh thigh meat. And you can see that it really hasn't recovered because the export volume has not recovered. This is a very high percentage of our export market. And the other minor parts have just kind of drifted along. So yes, while we may not have had a huge impact on total turkey use, certainly profitability has suffered because of these lower prices for parts and because of the fact that it is costing more to produce those parts than it did earlier in the year. Whole bird markets. In stocks are well below prior years. We started out low this year. We've not produced enough hens and put them into freezers for the holiday season to catch up. On the other hand, tom frozen stocks, like toms that go to retail, are about average. I'm not even going to show those numbers. So these low hen stocks have resulted in strong prices for both hens and toms, the second highest prices I've seen since 2015. The fresh hen premium over frozen has declined, though. Traditionally, it's been 15 to 25 cents. It was 10 cents in the most recent week. And I'm only going to show you the frozen prices. This is frozen hen stocks month in. The red line is this year. The other two lines are previous 2 years. And like I said, what you see is we started out well below the last 2 years, and we really have not caught up. And it is now August. This product starts to move out of inventory that is counted in the USDA stocks report to retail outlets in September and October. And you can see, in fact, a big drop in September, huge drop in October and November. It doesn't appear that we're going to catch up, and that is clearly shown up in prices. The red line, again, is this year. We are well above last year on frozen hens, and frozen toms that followed. Frozen tom price is essentially the same as the frozen hen price. So these are really, really good prices for our whole bird products, but they're not the majority of the market. Maybe making a little money on frozen products right now, but we turn around and losing it in the parts markets. Feed crop outlook. I thought I had this figured out until this morning, but the USDA crop production report came out just a few hours ago. It was forecasting record yields for both corn and soybeans. But we had a storm, and in Iowa, they're estimating there may have been 10 million acres of damage corn and soybeans. Not a total loss by any means, but it could certainly hurt our yields. We got these crops planted on time, unlike last year, which was very late. And both corn and soybean acreage increased versus last year. And we've had incredible weather, timely rains, no temperatures over 100 to amount to anything since planting. And that's reflected in the USDA crop conditions report, which are near record high for good to excellent conditions. These crops appear to be large, even with the storm damage. Yields will probably back off some from the record levels that we had, but it takes a lot longer to harvest corn that has been knocked over than it does when it's standing up. But farmers will still be able to harvest probably most of that acreage. On the demand side, export and ethanol use is going to grow. especially ethanol use, will grow in the September to September corn crop year because of the sharp reductions we saw in ethanol use as a result of the impact on fuel consumption in March, April, and May. So, but on balance, we're going to see ending stocks for both corn and soybeans are going to increase, and I'm forecasting that feed costs are estimated to decline about 10% for producing live turkeys. So, just to summarize, forecast calls for continued production cuts for the rest of this year and stocks reductions. The demand outlook depends on COVID and government policy, future virus spread and virus mortality, business restrictions, government economic support. And unlike the egg industry, turkey is not getting a significant amount of direct aid from the government. The turkey integrators are not considered to be farmers, and only about 10% of turkey is produced by non-integrated independent farmers that might be eligible for some sort of direct support from the government. But all these factors are very unpredictable. So keep in mind that this thing can turn on a dime, particularly business restrictions, depending on the COVID situation. Feed costs almost certainly going to be lower. And on balance, with lower stocks, lower production, unless we have significant government mandated business closures, the production demand balance is going to be substantially better by early next year or late this year. So we've had a lot of near-term pain, but long-term, with lower production to match what the market is willing and able to take, we should see some price increases, modest, but some price increases that will help cover our cost increases. And 2021 is shaping up to be a much better year than 2019 and 20 have been. Okay, that's it.
Okay, Tom, great presentation. Thanks so much. Let's see if we have any Q&A for our three excellent speakers here today. See if anybody's chimed in with a question or two. Let's see. There was a question, Tom, in regards to any data on COVID impact. I guess maybe that was asked in general. I'm not sure. Tom, do you want to kind of skirt that issue or talk a little bit about it?
Oh, yeah, I can do that. Particularly with regard to turkeys, plants have not had significant issues. If you want to include broilers, yeah, there have been some impacts on some of the broiler plants where in some cases, even management people have had to work on the lines. So it hasn't been a constraint yet in the turkey industry, though. There were a couple of outbreaks in the upper Midwest that resulted in plant closures for a week or two, but as far as I know, those fall plants are all back up and running. And we're able to process all of the turkeys that we can produce. Part of that is that production is coming down from last year, so that has also helped us keep the plants running.
Okay, great. Let's see if there's another one or two. Let's see. I think there was going to be a question, but I don't see it on here at the moment. So don't exactly know what that is. It was so basically, let's see. Any other questions, I guess, that we have for our speakers here? We've got a few more minutes to 1:30. Oh, yeah, this question is for Tom. Basically, why was there a surge in consumption?
Oh, yeah. I was actually going to make a comment about that. I can't speak for the whole country, but if you will remember, there was a couple of weeks there when there was a significant shortage of meat in the retail grocery store. I can remember going into my local Kroger, and the meat case was almost empty, but there were frozen turkeys available. And so I suspect that what happened was there were some leftover frozen turkeys in retailer inventory at the end of 2019, and those got put out as being available when there was just simply not much other product out there. So it doesn't surprise me at all that there was a surge in whole bird off retail.
Right. Yeah. The clarification of the question: consumption of whole birds due to the stay-at-home orders. I think you just addressed that.
Yeah, because it was product that was available, and there were some other strange things that showed up in our local grocery stores that are normally food service items that got repackaged and sold at retail. There was some beef cuts. There were some very large packs of pork ribs that showed up. That showed up actually in the coolers, but to pick them up, they were actually put in there frozen. So. And there was a pretty significant inventory of pork ribs available back in March that people had been apparently accumulating for the summer grilling season. And there was a day I went into the local Kroger, and an entire cooler was full of pork ribs, which I'd never seen that before. There were days when you couldn't buy breast meat, chicken breast meat. You could buy all the dark meat you wanted, but there was no breast meat available. It was a really strange mix of stuff that showed up in grocery stores.
Right, and I think yeah, good. So back on the first question, I actually didn't answer the full, ask the full question, but the COVID impact on, I think you addressed it, the COVID impact on poultry worker labor availability. And I think you answered that probably in the first, for the first question.
Yeah, it's a shock. There's just not, obviously, not a whole lot of publicly available data on that, especially for turkey industry. The chicken producers, of course, are much larger companies, and I know there were some public comments made by companies like Tyson and Purdue on that back in the heat of the moment in March and April, but I haven't heard much since.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Last questions before we leave this webinar. None have come in, so I just want to say, as moderator of the session, it's been great. We thank our three speakers: Hinda Mitchell, Maro Ibarburu, and Tom Elam, for presenting information in regards to what we've all been dealing with the last 4 to 5 months. And so we will close now at 1:30. Make sure that there are 2 other sessions this afternoon, turkey and processing. If you want to go to those webinars, that'd be fine. We thank our Diamond and Platinum sponsors. And then if you want to join us back at between 4 and 5 o'clock for happy hour and some speaker Q&A chat session, you're welcome to do that. So appreciate everybody for joining this session of Midwest Poultry Federation Convention. And we'll see you in other sessions and visit the floor too virtually. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.